Hello everyone! I recently participated in a 2-week game jam that had a $10,000 prize, and this is how it went. The jam was the Opera GX Jam, and not only was there a $10,000 prize for first place, but there was also a $7,000 prize for second place and a $3,000 prize for third, not to mention the game that won first place would become Opera GX's No Internet game. The theme for this jam was UFO, so why am I showing you Kingdom in the background? Well, that was my inspiration. I really liked the game Kingdom, and I thought making a space version of it seemed doable in 2 weeks. I got started by creating a new project, setting up my workspace, creating a Git repo, and hooking it up to GitHub. Git and GitHub have a lot of benefits, one of which I'll talk about later, but I also really like using the project board on GitHub, which you can see here as a to-do list in game jams. After getting all of that set up, I started to code. I got a basic room system going, created a menu, and got a basic button system up. For my buttons, I used a slightly simplified version of the button system that I go over in my button tutorials. Next, I worked on getting the universe to spawn in. My idea was that you would have a central homeworld, and then there would be other worlds you could expand out to, which would be areas you would mine and work on for more resources in order to explore and expand further, all the while defending yourself from the attacking monsters. There are a lot of different ways to randomly generate something, but I decided to go with some basic brute force circle packing. I had watched a few videos on it from the Coding Train and Coding Math YouTube channels a while ago, so I knew the basic idea, and I was able to implement it in GameMaker without too much of an issue. The way I did it, and I'm sure there are better ways, is I randomly picked a space in the room and checked it against the other worlds. If that space was taken, then I selected another position, again at random. But if the space was free, a world was placed. To avoid any possible endless loops or hangups, I used the repeat function and ran this every frame for a certain amount of frames. Since the game world was going to be small, I could get away with this, and I actually liked the visual of the worlds popping in over time. And speaking of that, I got this popping in effect by using GameMaker's relatively new animation curves. I actually experimented with animation curves a lot in this jam, using them for a variety of animation related things and also for controlling a portion of the difficulty curve. In fact, animation curves were I think the first big takeaway for me personally. I had used them for the first time only a few days before the jam, and so it was a lot of fun to learn about them and implement them in a variety of different situations. This was the first day of the jam. Over the next few days, progress continued pretty smoothly. I got a lot of the basic systems in. You could settle planets, they would produce resources, you had drones, the drones could follow you around, there were enemies that attacked, and by the end of the first week, I was kind of depressed. On my to-do list, I added, make the game fun. Now, it can be hard to evaluate a work in progress. Maybe the next thing is what is needed to make it all click together, but I didn't think that was what was going on here. At this point, I just felt that there was a problem in my core idea. One of the things that makes Kingdom so great is its atmosphere. It's incredibly beautiful and atmospheric. This is what my game looked like. I felt that there were two major roadblocks. The first is that one of the requirements of the jam was that you make all the art yourself. I'm not a great artist, and while I hadn't really tried yet, I knew I couldn't achieve anything that looked like Kingdom. Second, there was a 5 megabyte limit on the game. Music files can be really large. If I wanted to use even a few tracks of high quality atmospheric music, I'd also have to use higher quality sound effects so there wasn't a sound mismatch, and I was very concerned that I couldn't fit all of that into 5 megabytes. On top of all of this, I knew it was kind of a one-way trip. If I tried to make the idea work and it didn't, there wouldn't be time to do anything else, and I was really worried that I'd be left with an unfinished game. So, faced with concerns about my art skills, concerns about the file size, and doubts about whether even that would be enough, I decided to test out a new idea. I gave the player a gun, made the player and monsters faster, and made the monsters target the player more aggressively. It was a very different experience, but it was more fun. This was late Friday. Saturday, I explored this new idea some more. I also spent some time creating actual art. Both of these things went pretty well, and I felt like I was finally making progress again. I was going to sit down that night and really try to nail down this new direction, but then I bought Tribes of Midgard and played it with a bunch of friends until late at night, so that didn't happen. Sunday morning, I woke up, spent some time thinking about the new idea, and then opened GameMaker, and started deleting everything that didn't fit with this new direction. And because everything was backed up using source control, I could create a new branch, switch to it, and delete freely without any concerns of actually losing any of my code. All of my work is still there on the other branch, but on the new branch I had a nice, clean, focused project in the new direction. By Sunday afternoon, I deleted about half of the code that I'd written so far, and it was becoming a very different game, but again, I felt it was a lot more fun and I was actually enjoying testing it at this point. By the end of Sunday, I had something very close to the final version of the game with a few major exceptions. But first, I need to admit something. I didn't record nearly as much of the last few days of the jam as I should have, and I honestly don't know why. But through the magic of source control, I can easily jump back in time to prior versions of the game and recreate what happened. So a lot of the following footage will be that. I'm sorry, if I do this again, I'll be much better about recording in the actual moment. But back to the exceptions. The biggest exception was that I'd still only been testing it on Windows. Not only that, but I had literally never exported to HTML5 before. So I tried to export to HTML5. I got a white screen. Since I had never tried to export to HTML5 before, I didn't know if this was normal or not. So I set up a GameJolt page and figured out how to upload and display my game, same blank white screen, so something was wrong. My first attempt at solving the issue was watching some YouTube tutorials, of course, on GameMaker Studio and HTML5 games. There aren't very many and they didn't help with my exact issue, but they did show me something important. I didn't need to do anything special for the HTML5 process to work. I should just be able to switch the target to HTML5 and hit run. This wasn't working for me, so that meant there was a problem with my specific project. Next, I did a Google search for blank white screens in HTML5 games and GameMaker and found nothing. But then I remembered that you could inspect code in the browser, so I did that and saw the following error message. I searched for these error messages and also found nothing that helpful, except that it seemed like it might be a syntax thing. At this point, I made a post on the GMC forum, and while I was waiting for answers, started looking through all of my code to see if anything stood out. But nothing did. By then, I had answers on the GMC forum post, and while none of them actually solved it for me, they were still very helpful. What the answers told me was that normally, if it was an error in the code, the game would still run, and I could use the debugger. Since I couldn't even get the game to run, I thought maybe it was in one of my script assets, since those are compiled before the rest of your code runs. I started going through every script asset and commenting it out. After commenting out my PubSub manager script, the game compiled and ran. So then I went and started commenting out the various functions in my PubSub manager until I had narrowed it down to this one, and then specifically this one line of code. This type of syntax is allowed on Windows, possibly on other platforms, but it's an unusual way to write it, so I rewrote it over a few more lines, and it worked. I finally had made a working HTML5 game. This was early Tuesday morning, and at this point a lot of the game was done, which was great because I work full-time and have other obligations, so there wasn't that much time left actually for me to work on the game, even though in theory I had till Friday. I spent that time adding in the various features the game was missing, such as a help screen and a 2-player mode. I also converted all of my buttons to only use keyboard input, using my own tutorials to help me remember how to do this, and since I was using a version of those buttons, that turned out to be pretty easy. I did run into a few more HTML related issues. The first was actually a feature, not a bug. It makes sense, but HTML games won't play sound until you click into them, and keyboard presses don't count. Since I converted everything to keyboard only, this meant my game didn't have sound unless someone happened to click the screen for some reason. However, the fix for this was easy, just add a click to continue screen at the start of the game. The second though was another bug, or at least bug-ish. For 2 players, I was checking to see if only one remained, and if only one remained, then I was creating a respawn timer and respawning that player. Since only one player object would remain at this point, I was using dot notation to access that remaining player's ship to determine which player they were. So if player 1 was left, I would spawn in player 2, and if player 2 was left, I would spawn in player 1. On Windows, this was no problem, but it turns out that on HTML5, the dot notation can access recently destroyed instances. So even though there was only one active instance, the dot notation was accessing the recently destroyed player and saying the wrong player was still alive. Again, the GMC forum, particularly Roldy, came through for me and gave me a simple alternative. I also experienced my favorite bug. I'm not sure exactly what's happening here, but cleaning the cache fixed it. So the final days were spent polishing and tweaking. I spent a fair amount of time trying to get the difficulty curve right. I still think it's a little bit too hard. However, Friday evening, I uploaded the game, read through all of the rules to make sure I had done everything I needed to, and called it. There were a lot of things that I wanted to add that I cut for time. I wanted to have different ships that you could select from, and some power-ups that you could collect, a shader to do some palette swapping. I also wanted to add touch controls so that it could be played on mobile devices, and I wanted to add some room transitions and maybe some screen shake. I spent no time making the game's page look nice, and I do regret that, but I'm pretty happy with the actual game. I even go back and play it sometimes if I'm stuck waiting for something on my computer, so I think that it's accomplished its goal. Overall, it was a great experience. There were approximately 900 submissions, and unsurprisingly, my game did not make it into the top 8, or of course therefore the top 3, but I made a game that I'm really happy with. I got a lot of practice in using animation curves, and I coded a few cool things, and the biggest deal for me personally, at least, is that I now know how to make and publish HTML5 games, and how to handle some of that platform's quirks. I'll be posting the source code for the game itself in another video, so check that out if you're interested.